been over a decade, and I still can't sleep through the night, not without something chasing me. Some nights, I wake up soaked in sweat, clinging to the edge of the mattress, like I've been falling through some endless dark. Other times I wake with no memory of the dream, just the feeling, raw and metallic like a scream that never makes it out of my throat. I don't talk about it not because I'm afraid people won't believe me, but because I know what it cost me the last time I tried. I lost everything, my wife, my brother. I haven't spoken to my daughter in 6 years. And when I see myself in the mirror now, I barely recognize what's left. Sometimes I sit in the dark, turning it over in my mind like a shard of glass. I try to find a version of the memory that makes sense, one that doesn't end in blood or silence, or that face lit by candlelight. But there isn't one. There's just what I saw, and what it took from me. This isn't something I want to share. I've carried it in silence for years, like a rotting tooth lodged in my soul. But something changed recently. Something I came across that made the nightmares worse. Made me wonder if I was wrong to ever stop talking. So I'm going to try again. If you're still here, by the end of this story, if you don't shut this down or call me crazy, maybe you'll understand why I can't keep quiet anymore. But you need to know up front, this isn't a ghost story. It's not fiction. And it didn't start with monsters. It started with money, with work, with me doing what I'd always done, trying to provide for my family. Back then, I was just another burned out contractor in Kansas City. Small jobs, slow winters, always behind on something. My mother had just been diagnosed with early onset dementia, and I was scrambling for anything that would cover her care. That's when the email came through from a firm I'd done subcontract work for in the past, an international project in a private campus with a sensitive client. And the most important part for me, the big money. I didn't even think twice. I packed my tools, kissed mother goodbye, and flew to Johannesburg the next week. It was supposed to be simple, just 6 weeks of electrical retrofit on a high security campus outside the city. I didn't even know the name of the place until I got there. It was the Oprah Winfrey Leadership Academy. I remember thinking how strange it was that someone like Oprah, a global celebrity, had built a school way out here, so removed from everything. It sat behind high gates with armed security and no signage. Inside, everything was pristine, modern, polished, almost clinical. But from the first day, I felt off, like I was being watched. There were rules, a lot of them. We weren't allowed to bring phones on site. We had to sign NDAs thicker than the job manual. We were confined to the workers' quarters unless we had a supervisor escort. Even the air felt strange, like everything had been designed to be quiet. And yet I told myself it was normal, just rich people being cautious. Maybe Oprah had dealt with threats before. Maybe it was just a well-guarded school with too much money to spend. I didn't ask questions. I needed to check. Still, something in me kept noticing things I couldn't quite explain. Doors that didn't appear on the schematics. Unused hallways with fresh footprints. Rooms that had no labels, no numbers. Staff who didn't make eye contact. A silence that wasn't peaceful, it was enforced. I brushed it off. I had a job to do. But at night, in the workers' dorms, I'd hear noises I couldn't place. Distant, echoing. Like chanting in a language I didn't recognize. I didn't mention it to anyone. Most of the other contractors were from overseas too. Quiet, focused. No one wanted to get flagged and pulled from the job. But something was building. I felt it in my chest every time I walked past the South Annex. The section no one ever went near. The one with the biometric scanner and double locked doors. I can't tell you why I chose to stay late that night. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was stupidity. But what I saw there, that's when everything cracked open. And the version of the world I thought I knew died that night. For a long time, I convinced myself I imagined it. That the memory was just some sickness, something my brain had created to explain what I couldn't process. I tried to move on. I really did. I came home. picked up small jobs, stayed sober, went back to church for a while, sat in the back pew and told myself I could pray it away. My wife had come back, but she asked questions I didn't know how to answer. She'd catch me staring at nothing for hours, or wake up to find me standing in the hallway with my hand shaking and my jaw clenched, like I'd been fighting something in my sleep. I told her it was just the stress, the travel. She believed me until she didn't. We separated again the following year. I stopped bringing up South Africa in conversation, pretended I'd never been there. But it never really left me. The smell of that place, the way the concrete underground was always cold, no matter the weather. The faces. And then a few months ago, something changed. A friend sent me a link, just a dumb video, he said. Some guy ranting online about conspiracies and missing children. I almost deleted it, almost. But the moment I clicked, I saw her. Her face, smiling, soft-voiced, speaking to a crowd like nothing was wrong. And just like that, I was back there again. In the flight heat, the black SUVs waiting at the airport. The way they took my phone at the gate and handed me a set of new tools still in the plastic, tagged with my name. The first time I stepped through the entrance, I remember thinking how empty it was. Spotless floors. Perfect landscaping. But no laughter, no music, no posters on the walls. Not even the sound of students moving between classes. Just stillness. Like the buildings themselves were. We were only supposed to work in pairs. Always supervised. But the place was so sprawling, so layered with corridors and locked doors, that more than once I found myself separated. And that's when I started to notice things. Wires that led nowhere. Doors that appeared on no blueprint. Hallways that bent in unnatural ways. Like they'd been designed by someone who didn't care about logic, only secrecy. And deeper still were rooms without lights. Cold concrete chambers without acoustics. Unmarked metal doors with reinforced locks on the outside. I'd ask questions softly, carefully, and be met with a wall of silence. Or worse, a smile that didn't reach the eyes. One of the older contractors, a guy from Durban named Ravi, pulled me aside after work one evening and said, "You're asking too much. Finish your shift. Keep your head down." He wouldn't speak to me again after that. Still, I kept noticing how every clock inside the South Annex was exactly 6 minutes fast. How the power in certain rooms would spike between 2 and 3 a.m., even though no one was supposed to be inside after midnight. How the entire West Wing had been retrofitted with soundproofing insulation, top to bottom, even the stairwells. And then there were the voices. Not screaming, not talking, just a steady hum, low rhythmic, almost like someone chanting just below the range of hearing. At first I thought I was losing it, but I wasn't the only one. A young guy from France quit after just 3 nights. Left everything behind in his bunk and disappeared. They told us he was relocated to another project. But his boots were still under the bed. His badge still on the hook. By week 4, I knew something was wrong. I just didn't know how wrong yet. It wasn't until I found the door behind the server panels. The one that didn't show up on any blueprint. The one with no knob, no markings, just a smooth black surface colder than anything around it. That I stopped thinking about money. I stopped thinking about my contract, my paycheck, my NDA, and I started thinking about the fact that whatever was happening here, someone had gone to great lengths to bury it under stone, under silence. And behind the face of a woman the world had learned to trust without question. There's a moment after enough time in a place like that when your instincts begin whispering things your rational mind can't quite process. You start noticing how the air never really smells like the outside, how the clocks always seem a little slow, how some corners of the building feel heavier, like something unseen is pressing down. You tell yourself it's the architecture, maybe the way concrete absorbs heat, but you know it's not. You know it's something deeper, something meant to stay hidden. I wasn't looking for anything that day. I just finished replacing a corroded switch plate on the East Utility line, a task so routine I could do it half asleep. My clipboard was under my arm, The hallway in front of me dim and quiet like always. But then I saw it. A bend in the corridor I didn't remember. Just a slight turn near a junction I'd passed dozens of times before. At first, I assumed I'd misremembered the layout. Maybe the floor plan had been updated. Or maybe I was overtired. But then I checked the printed schematic in my folder. That wing was supposed to end in a flat wall. What stood there instead was a slight angle leading into a short stretch of corridor, unlit, unmarked, with paint that looked newer than everything else around it. And the air was colder. Not noticeably, not like stepping into a fridge, but just enough to make your skin tighten if you were paying attention. I walked toward it slowly. I didn't feel brave, just pulled. The wall at the end had a faint seam, not much wider than a fingernail. I reached out, and before I could apply any pressure, the panel gave inward. It didn't swing open like a door, more like it slid back into itself, quietly, as though it had been waiting. Behind it, a stairwell descended into darkness. No lights, no signage, just rough concrete steps, narrow and steep, leading down in a tight spiral. I hesitated there, 1 foot hovering above the first step, feeling the hum of something distant, something low and pulsing beneath the floor. I don't remember making the decision to descend. I just remember the feeling of the hallway disappearing behind me with every step, the air growing stiller, the silence more complete. When I reached the bottom, the architecture changed completely. The stairwell opened into a corridor made of stone, real stone, not concrete or paneling. Smooth, seamless blocks that looked older than anything in the rest of the facility. The floor sloped slightly downward, and the light came from narrow strips above, not wired, just glowing dim, uneven, barely enough to cast shadows. There were doors, 8 of them, 4 on either side. They were built into the stone with frightening precision, tall and heavy, metal darkened by time. No handles, no hinges. Just thick slabs sealed shut. Above each was a symbol, nothing I recognized, no numbers, no letters, just strange carvings. Some circular, some jagged, all etched with a kind of care that made them feel ceremonial. I walked past the first one, then the second. Each door seemed to breathe slightly as I passed, as though the space behind them adjusted to my presence. The 4th door on the left had a mark that stopped me 3 vertical lines intersected by a spiral. It meant nothing to me, and yet I felt the urge to reach out and touch it, like I'd seen it in a dream I couldn't recall. I didn't. I kept walking. The further I went, the more the hallway seemed to bend, subtly, pulling me deeper without any real sense of distance. And then I saw the floor. There was a narrow groove running down the center, almost invisible, like something had been dragged along the same path again and again. Something heavy, something wet. At the end of the corridor was a wall mural, painted in thick, black strokes directly onto the stone. Crude figures encircled a central shape, small bodies, heads bowed, arms reaching inward. At the center was a figure not drawn in human proportion. Its limbs were wrong, its face was blank. Behind it, rising above, something massive loomed, horned or maybe crowned, arms wide like wings. Around the base, a ring of red dots. Blood, maybe. Symbolic, maybe not. Below it, in handwriting too neat for the rest of the image, was a phrase. That which is given returns in kind. My eyes locked onto the sentence. It shouldn't have meant anything, but it did. The words sat heavy in my chest like they'd been spoken before. Not to me, but about me, like I was already part of the offering. Then came the sound. A low scrape of metal against metal from somewhere down the hall. It wasn't violent. It wasn't fast. It was slow, steady, deliberate. One of the doors had moved. I don't remember walking back. I just remember being upstairs again. I remember the panel I entered through was gone, repainted, smoothed over, nothing left but an unbroken wall. And when I passed the security station on my way out, the guard didn't scan me. He just nodded once, slowly, and looked past me like I wasn't there at all. I tried to forget the hallway. I told myself maybe I'd imagined it, or maybe someone was testing security protocols. But even then, I knew that wasn't true. Whatever I had seen down there, it wasn't part of the school. It was something beneath it, around it, threaded through its bones like a second, hidden structure. The staff didn't mention it. Neither did the security logs. And yet, something in the air changed after that day. The silence grew thicker. The girls looked at me differently. They had always been reserved, disciplined, alert. But now there was something else in their eyes. A kind of recognition. As if I'd crossed into a space they already understood. I tried to stay busy. I buried myself in maintenance work, stuck to open areas, avoided empty halls. But the whispers came anyway, not spoken, written. It started with a folded note, left wedged behind the fuse box on the second floor. It said only, "We hear it too." The handwriting was careful, young. A child's, maybe 12 or 13. At first, I thought it was a prank, but the next one came 2 days later, left inside my toolbox. Some doors stay shut. Others just pretend. I didn't tell anyone. Who would I even tell? Then came the drawing. I found it tucked beneath my wiper blade in the parking lot. A plain sheet of lined notebook paper, folded clean down the middle. On one side, the same 8 doors from the underground hallway, drawn with the kind of obsessive care that only comes from memory. Every symbol matched, even the spiral. On the back, a phrase in the same neat hand, "The eye opens in 3. I didn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about the third door, the one that felt warm behind the frame, the one I had almost touched. I told myself to ignore it. I told myself that whatever game these girls were playing, it would pass. But then I saw her. She was sitting alone at the back of the library, in the section students weren't supposed to access without a pass. No staff were present. The lights above her buzzed faintly, flickering just slightly as I passed. She didn't move when I approached, just sat there, cross-legged on the floor, a thin leather, bound book open across her lap. She couldn't have been more than 10. I knelt slowly and asked her what she was reading. She turned the book toward me without speaking. The text was in a language I didn't know. Sharp, angular shapes that looked etched more than printed. Symbols that reminded me of the ones carved above the doors. When I asked where she found it, she said nothing, but she smiled, not cruelly, not mockingly, just knowingly. Then she said it quietly, like she was repeating something she'd memorized long ago. "Hawatch is from the center. You saw him, didn't you?" I froze. She didn't wait for a response. She closed the book, stood without hesitation, and walked past me like I wasn't even there. Later, when I went back to the library to check, the book was gone. Not just reshelved, completely erased from inventory. The shelf it had been on no longer existed, and that girl, I never saw her again. Not in the lunch hall, not in the yard, not during roll call. No staff mentioned her name. No photo of her existed in the student database. But I remember her voice, clear, steady, almost rehearsed. "You saw him, didn't you?" That same night, another note appeared. This one was placed inside the vent above my cot. "He showed you the mural. He shows all of us. That's how we're chosen." I didn't sleep for 3 days after that. By then, I wasn't sure what was real. I'd stopped trusting the blueprints, stopped trusting the people around me. Everyone I spoke to seemed too calm, too polite, like their smiles were covering something raw underneath, like they already knew where I'd been, and they were waiting to see if I'd talk about it out loud. But the girls, they didn't hide it. Not in the same way. They were too young to fake that kind of innocence. And that's what made it worse. Because innocence isn't supposed to speak in prophecy. It's not supposed to recognize symbols drawn in blood. It's not supposed to whisper truths in languages older than memory. And yet, one by one, they did. You don't leave a place like that without something following you. Not in the shadows. Not in your dreams. It's quieter than that. Like your mind rearranges itself, like it's protecting something it knows you're not ready to remember. For the first few months after I left the school, I kept my head down, took on simple electrical jobs, light rewiring, residential mostly. Something about working in people's homes made the silence easier to live with. I told myself I was done looking. that whatever happened back there was over, buried. But that's a lie. The truth is the silence started to rot. There were things I couldn't stop thinking about. Patterns, schedules, specific rooms being unavailable every 13 days. Staff who never blinked when girls disappeared mid-term. No police, no media, no names. And that spiral I found carved into the dorm furnace pipe. I saw it again in Johannesburg, etched into a back alley wall behind a boarding house that serviced elite, all-girls schools. Same shape, same direction, same depth, like it was scratched in with purpose. I stood staring at it long enough that someone threw a bottle at me from a window above. I started digging. The search started clinical, spiral symbol boarding school. Missing girls, South Africa, ritual markings. But the deeper I went, the more the results started repeating, like something had scrubbed them clean, except one. A 41-minute video, uploaded anonymously to a back-end mirror of an old truth-seeking blog. Just the thumbnail of a man sitting in shadow, hood over his face, beard visible, voice disguised through cheap-pitch distortion. He called himself a former high priest, more of an ex-satanic priest. The interviewer's face never appeared. It was mostly the sound of scribbling and heavy breathing, like he didn't want to interrupt. The bearded man started slowly, like someone afraid of hearing himself say it aloud. There are places they build, he said, to harvest silence. The walls aren't the prison. The obedience is. I didn't know what that meant until he began describing the locations. All girls facilities, high security, funded by charitable trusts no one questions. Often tied to names that show up on television, philanthropists, celebrities, humanitarian awards. That's when I felt it. He spoke about the ceremony, cycles, recitations that occurred without words, and a mark, the spiral. He said it was not a sigil in the traditional sense. It was a seal, something older, a symbol that invited a presence once it had been repeated in the correct intervals. Children vanish, he said, but not into nothing. Half of those never found were never lost. They were given. The interviewer pressed him. Who's they? What is this giving? Is this metaphor? But the man just leaned forward and held up his palm, burned into the flesh, clear even through the low res compression. Was that exact same spiral, scabbed over, raised. He said it was a ritual, a sign of entry. But he said something else too. They don't mark you unless you've given. I paused the video. My stomach turned. I could still remember the coil carved into the pipe under that dorm. But this wasn't imitation. This wasn't a doodle or a childish scrawl. It was the same shape. And now I'd seen it in 3 places, one on school property, one in the alley of a known trafficking corridor, and one on the body of a man who claimed to have orchestrated the disappearances of children for sacrifice. I kept watching. The priest said they operated in 3s. Always. He said the ceremonies were performed to keep them here. The girls are not chosen, he said. They are filtered through obedience, through isolation, through fear, until only the hollow ones remain. But he did reference South Africa. Once, indirectly, he mentioned a woman, one with power, with the face of care and the hands of a collector. She had built a facility, in the cradle of the continent, he said, a place where girls would be taught to forget their names before they ever learned their purpose. That's when I closed the laptop, because I'd seen her once. Not in person, but in a framed photo, just inside the school's administrative wing. Her hand on the shoulder of a smiling graduate. Oprah Winfrey. The spiral was real. The disappearances were real. And now I was hearing from a man who once branded himself to serve it, that this wasn't isolated. It was infrastructure. And the worst part wasn't what I had learned. It was what I had remembered. Because the spiral under the dorm, I didn't just find it. I touched it. I traced it with my bare hand in the dark, the night I thought I was just fixing a boiler. And I haven't been the same since. I didn't plan to spiral again. I really didn't. After I left the grounds, I thought maybe time would do what it's supposed to. I thought distance would loosen the knots that had formed in my chest. That sleep would eventually come. That food might stop tasting like ash, but all it took was a late night headline, something almost stupid. A meme, of all things. A low-resolution clip of Oprah, younger than I'd ever seen her, sitting stiff in a faded teal armchair. She looked raw, not broken, but different, like someone who knew she was saying something that wouldn't be allowed again. The caption just said, "Back when she used to tell the truth." I don't know what made me click. Curiosity maybe, or something deeper. That quiet instinct that whatever had happened in that school hadn't started there. That I was only seeing one piece of a much older game. It was from her 1980s daytime show. The topic was satanic ritual abuse. Not metaphor, not fiction, not overblown panic. She brought guests forward who described things I still can't repeat out loud. And she didn't flinch. She didn't laugh it off. She acknowledged them. She gave them a microphone. She told millions of viewers that these kinds of horrors were real. That the people doing them were protected, hidden behind power and wealth. I kept replaying her face. The way her voice dropped when she spoke about symbols, about children disappearing, about how even the victims had been trained not to remember what was done to them. That episode aired decades before her name was carved into the stone walls of a South African boarding school. That's what haunted me. Because somehow, somewhere along the way, the woman who once warned the world about the darkness became the face of something no one is allowed to talk about. I searched through archives that night, not just talk show footage, but press releases, foundation launches, gala events. A pattern started forming, not in the words, those were always clean, inspirational, publicist approved, but in the visuals, in the staging, in the timing, certain colors, certain dates. Symbol arrangements that repeated across different years, different continents, always buried under the surface. The spiral came up again. On banners, on merchandise, even on some of the murals painted by students at her school, stylized enough to be dismissed, but consistent enough to feel rehearsed. That shape had followed me out of the tunnels. I'd seen it scratched into brickwork, woven into hair braids on ceremonial posters, etched faintly into the metal corners of the administration wing. Now it was showing up on her magazine covers, hidden in plain sight. I didn't want to be the kind of person who saw ghosts in ink. But the more I looked, the more I couldn't ignore what I was seeing. And worse, what I was feeling, because the Oprah of 1989, that version wasn't innocent either. That's what broke me. It wasn't that she changed. It was that she knew. She knew what those people did. She looked into the camera and told us they existed. And the world thanked her for being brave, then looked away. But she didn't. She got closer. She didn't shut the door. She built a house on top of it. The school, the foundations, the billion-dollar branding, it was never just about education or empowerment. Those were the mirrors they gave us, so we'd never think to look behind the glass. I searched for old footage of her school's opening ceremony. I watched the crowd cheering. I watched her cut the ribbon, and then I froze the screen. Behind her, on the concrete stage, carved faintly into the backdrop, a spiral. In the way she structured her empire, always circular, always returning to origin. Shows that looped into brands, brands that looped into charities, charities that fed back into the platform that built her. There's something ancient in that shape, not just aesthetically, spiritually. And when I started mapping event dates from her public appearances against lunar phases and solstice alignments, it stopped being coincidence. I wasn't chasing shadows anymore. I was cataloging cycles, and each cycle led back to her. The public saw her as the builder of schools, of careers, of movements. But I was starting to see her as a curator, a keeper of gates, someone who didn't just warn the world once, but offered that warning as a kind of invitation. A test. Who listened? Who forgot? Who followed? I didn't want to be any of those people. But I didn't know where that left me. Because knowing didn't free me. It changed me. Now I hear her voice in quiet moments. Not in words, but in tone. That steady rhythm. The cadence of someone who's always one step ahead of your disbelief. Not pleading, not explaining. just confirming what you already suspect, she warned us. And most of us smiled, clapped, or even changed the channel. And now, it's too late to say we didn't see it coming. I used to think these things were symbols, metaphors, warnings painted in red, made to scare the knave and stir online rumors. But that was before I started learning how real rituals hide in plain sight, not just in scripture or whispered rumors, but in the land itself, in the bones of ancient tradition. I remember watching Gogo Mawani for the first time, half out of curiosity, half out of desperation. She spoke calmly. She never raised her voice. But something in the way she described African spiritual power made my stomach clench, not out of fear, but recognition. Not everything buried is dead. Some things grow downward. Some spirits never needed our belief to stay active, only our silence. She wasn't talking about Oprah, not directly. But the pattern she described, the use of location, the sacred manipulation of space, sacrifice as energy transfer, matched everything I'd seen. The school wasn't just a school, it was an altar. The land beneath it chosen, aligned, consecrated, sealed. And the spiral, that wasn't decorative. It wasn't branding, it was a gate. People like the bearded priest had tried to tell us. He wasn't hysterical, he was tired. He spoke about missing children not as statistics, but as currency. Ritual requires value. The more innocent, the more intact the offering, the stronger the result. And when I think about the way Oprah once warned the world in front of cameras, with witnesses, with tears, it no longer feels like bravery. It feels like disclosure, like a magician showing you the trick, just before making you part of it. The spiral doesn't end. It's not a story, it's a system. A living structure old as dust, masked by celebrity and charity and empire. And when I look back at everything I thought I understood, the school, the rituals, the silence, I no longer ask why I was shown these things. I ask why I survived. Because now I see it. The logic, the structure, the choreography of belief. The ritual didn't begin in the tunnel. It began in history, in blood, in symbols, in land. Gogo Mawani called it ancestral memory. I call it the echo. The part of you that remembers what your mind forgets. And that echo won't stop ringing. It grows louder each time I look away. The spiral keeps turning, not in the dark, not in secret, but here, in the open, disguised as progress. And I fear the next time I see it, I won't run. I'll follow. If you've made it this far, maybe some part of you already knew that something darker hides beneath the surface, that the stories we ignore don't stop unfolding. If this stayed with you, if it made you think twice before looking away, then like the video. Share it and subscribe for more, because the deeper we go, the harder it is to climb back out. And some stories are only just beginning.